Well, hello and welcome. My name is Gloria Washington, and I will be the host and moderator for this ADEIL conference session. Thank you for joining us for incorporating OERs into a course, Understanding the Course Redesign Process. Please welcome Barbara Williamson Holly.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gloria, for that awesome introduction. Today we have with us as our technical person, Ms. Mallory DeMay. Mallory, before we got started, I wanted to know if you would please take participants through how to participate in the chat, as well as how to participate in a poll, just general instructions. I don't want to assume that everyone knows the inner workings of Zoom.
Of course.
This is a very interactive session.
Yes. So in the chat, you all should see the chat button on the bottom. So you have access to that already. So, and I see some people have already started to use it to say hello. So yeah, just click on that chat icon at the bottom and you should be able to type and enter your comments there. And then yes, there is going to be about 6 polls throughout this presentation that I have preloaded. So once I launch each poll, you'll just choose an answer that would apply most to you. And then I believe there's like a submit button. So, so yeah, it's pretty easy to use. So I will turn it back over to Barbara. Oh, you're on mute, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Thank you all for joining today's session. The title of today's session is Incorporating OERs into a Course. OERs is Open Education Resources. And with incorporating open education resources, we want to make sure that we understand how it drives the course redesign process when we go from publisher-created text to open education resource. All right. All right, for this session, the main objectives are to discuss the course redesign process, as well as to identify factors to consider when incorporating open educational resources into a course. Now, before we get started, I want to make sure that I have a kind of a good view of who we have in our audience today. So our first poll is going to ask you to indicate in which role do you currently serve. If your role is not provided, please feel free to choose other. It's important as we go through this presentation that we recognize the roles and responsibilities of our audience so that we can make sure that we tailor the presentation to your needs as they're related to the course redesign process and incorporating OERs. So it seems as if most of our audience members are faculty members, as well as we have a few instructional designers and instructional technologists. So thank you all again for joining us today. As we go through today, we want to be reminded of a general definition of course redesign. This definition will drive our discussions as we go through our presentation today. So I just want to go ahead and read what we're going to define course redesign as we go through the presentation. Course redesign is the process of redesigning whole courses rather than individual classes or sections to achieve better learning outcomes at a lower cost by taking advantage of the capabilities of information technology. Course redesign is not just about putting courses online. In the current role in which I serve, so many requests come in to transition courses to an online format without engaging in the course redesign process. And I always have to make it a note to say what we use or what we teach or how we teach in a traditional face-to-face course is very different from what we would use in a digital or virtual online format. So we have to engage in the course redesign process because we want students to be able to have that same quality learning experience in an online environment as they would in a traditional. So I spend a lot of my time consulting faculty on the differences between what those two learning experiences look like. So now that we have a common definition of course redesign, I wanted to know, have you ever redesigned a course? Now, let me explain the different responses. If you have designed a course just by yourself, you came up with the content, you did the research, you came up with the instructional strategies, didn't really consult with any external persons outside of yourself, then you would have redesigned your course individually. Somewhat means that you did the bulk of the work. However, maybe you had input from a colleague or you had input from the librarian. They sent you over just a couple of resources. As a team means that you maybe work with an instructional designer, instructional technologist, those different roles that we had to respond to in our first poll. Maybe you work with, maybe you built the team as a course developer with another faculty member and you guys work together with other persons that taught the course. And then sometimes as an adjunct, we don't have the opportunity to design courses. Those courses come to us already ready, or we already have a syllabus. So maybe you would be in the category of never. Awesome. So course redesign is meant to be a collaborative activity, and it seems that most of us have engaged in that process as a team, which is awesome. For those of you who have never engaged in the course redesign process, my hope is that as we go throughout this presentation, you'll get a better idea of what that process looks like and what it entails, as well as those individuals available to help you as you go throughout the process. Now that we've defined whether or not we have redesigned the course, what was your role in redesigning that course? Did I skip one? Yes. What was your role in that course development process? Were you the course developer? Were you the instructional designer where you made recommendations in regards to instructional strategies or some type of technologies or multimedia that can be used? Were you an administrator in which you set the timeline and you actually selected a course to be redesigned? Were you the subject matter expert in which you just reviewed the course to ensure that the subject was, or the subject matter or the content was fitting? Were you a faculty member in which you just taught the course, or library support in which you provided library resources? So it seems that there's a tie between instructional designer and faculty. Now most of us are faculty just teaching the course. So there is a difference in when we teach the course and when we actually develop the course. I found, as serving as a course developer, that when I hand over the course to faculty to teach, there's a certain level of explanation that's required so that the faculty can take ownership of that course and be accountable for the learning experience. So for those of you who have never designed an online course, what do you think your role in the course development process would be? Would you be doing it alone as a course developer? Or are you the person that provides consultations and recommendations for faculty as they engage in the course development process? Good. So the subject matter experts, they would just serve as sort of like a peer reviewer, making sure if the course was developed externally by a vendor or by an external faculty member, they would just serve as a reviewer. If it's created by a course developer other than yourself, but you guys teach the same subject, you would review. And of course, the instructional designer will ensure that the learning experience is of quality and is student-centered. So as we talk about course redesign, first, before we go to the incorporation of open education resources, Why do we even redesign courses? Those reasons can be found in the definition of course redesign. So as I read the definition, just think about whether or not you can identify the reasons why we engage in course design. Course redesign is the process of redesigning whole courses. So even if the course is taught in 4 sections, meaning there are 4 instances of the course, we're talking about the whole course, what we would deem as the master course, in which all of those sections would be derived from. Course redesign is the process of redesigning whole courses to achieve better learning outcomes. So that's the first reason. Maybe the industry has changed, or maybe the material has become somewhat dated, or maybe you just need to revamp the course to better equip students for the working world or the next course. You want to make sure that you always reevaluate your course level outcomes so that we can ensure that we are setting students up for success. So that's one reason, to achieve better learning outcomes. Secondly, at a lower cost. This is when we talk about open education resources. Usually when we talk about OERs, they're free. However, some of them have a low cost associated with those open education resources. So we have to kind of think about whether or not those open education resources kind of complement and enhance the quality of our course and learning experiences for students. But that's one reason why we engage in redesigning a course, to incorporate OERs so that there's lower costs for students. By taking advantage of the capabilities of information technology. Maybe the instructional designer or instructional technologist recommended to you that there are technologies that you can incorporate in your course, or you just want to use the learning management system more. For a face-to-face course, you want students to submit all of their assignments within the learning management system. Those are reasons to look at the capabilities of information technology and how they can enhance the student's learning experience. Maybe you want students to be more interactive. So you want to use the learning management system discussion forums or blogs or wikis to kind of drive home that for students, or to initiate that interactivity for students. And finally, course redesign is not just about putting courses online. So remember, when we talked about the definition earlier, I told you one of the most major reasons why we engage in the course redesign process at the university in which I am employed is because we're wanting to put those courses online, because we are creating online programs and we need to have those courses available. So while it's not the sole reason you want to engage in the redesign process, it is one of the major reasons why we engage in the course redesign process. So now, when we talk about course redesign, one of the reasons or the key factors of why we engage in course redesign is because we want to achieve better learning outcomes. So what we've done at South Carolina State University is kind of broken our course development process down into 3 categories, 3 tiers, or 3 phases. And the first phase is content development. So before our professors actually move on to loading their course or looking at the learning experiences, how to incorporate different technologies, we focus on the content development portion. So let's look at the content development process, because this is very important when incorporating open education resources into your course. First and foremost, we want to start the content development process with the backwards by design approach. We first want to know what students should be able to do by the end of the course, and we want to work our way backwards. Many times we'll start with the tests and assessments, or we'll just start with collecting content so that we can have a more focused approach to make sure that when we are selecting content that is fitting and that it will all fit logically and be clear and concise to students, we want to start with what will students be able to do by the end of the course, or what do we want students to be able to do. One of the strategies that I engage professors in when we're developing courses or redesigning courses at South Carolina State is a brainstorming session. Just write down everything that you want students to be able to do by the end of the course. Then our courses are 15 weeks. I have them group them into 5 to 7 categories. The headings for those 5 to 7 categories become the course level outcomes, which is what we want students to be able to do. And those groups, those items underneath each category become the weekly or module level objectives. So that's one way that you can use the backwards by design approach to jumpstart the content development process. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to use the raise your hand feature. I want this session to be as interactive as possible. So when we talk about the content development process, what does that actually look like? We start with the development of course level outcomes, making sure that they're measurable, making sure that they use action verbs. There are several rules or guiding principles that we present around the creation of course level outcomes. One that I have found myself having to explain a little bit more than the others is having a loaded outcome, meaning you have an outcome that pertains to more than one content area and you use more than one action verb. While course level outcomes are meant to be more general and broad, we do want them to be specific enough to create a focus for the course. When we select course level outcomes, we want to make sure that we are selecting them based on the program level outcomes, any type of accrediting body or governing body, any type of industry standards that we want to satisfy within the course, but we also want them to be related to the university's overall mission and goal as well. Throughout the content development process, there needs to be embedded evaluations. So we evaluate those course level outcomes to ensure that they're measurable, clear and concise, and to ensure that they're logical and focused. After we select course level outcomes, we already know what we want students to be able to do by the end of the course. Now we can begin to work our way backwards. So the next phase or the next step would be to select content. In the selection of content, you want to make sure that you take into account what you want students to be able to do, and you want to select content based on those stated course level outcomes. You want to be sure to evaluate the content, and we'll talk about that a little bit more on how we can evaluate the content and some practices that we can use to ensure that we select appropriate content based on our subject area. After you select the content, then now we're ready to break those course level outcomes down into more manageable chunks in the form of objectives and assignments. So here is when we are ready to kind of give students what they need to be able to do in shorter increments in order to lead to the overall goal of meeting the course level outcomes. And also with assignments, here's where we are ready to assess whether students meet or exceed the module or weekly level objectives, because remember, those are directly related to the course level outcomes. So if we have students meeting or exceeding our expectations each week or in each module as they're stated in the objectives, then by the end of the course, if it's all aligned, they surely should be able to meet and exceed what we stated we want them to be able to do by the end of the course. After we select the objectives and assignments, now we're ready to select the learning experiences. And keep in mind that as you go through each step or each phase of the content development process, that you should not be doing it alone. It should be a collaborative effort. When we talk about the selection of learning experiences, this is where the incorporation or the inclusion of an instructional designer will truly be beneficial, so that they can review the objectives, review the assignments. And South Carolina State is a quality managed institution. So as I work with professors and faculty on a team as we develop courses, I'm also completing the quality managed review, which is required for courses right now at South Carolina State to be taught online. And we are trying to expand that expectation. I shouldn't say requirement, that expectation. So as we select learning experiences, this is when we start looking at technologies. This is when we start looking at different instructional strategies that will serve students better, or that will allow students to be more actively engaged in the course. All of those different components are important when we talk about the selection of learning experiences. Now, what you're going to find when we talk about open education resources is that it's kind of different when we talk about the publisher created material and the open education resources. Some open education resources you find would not have those interactive components, those drag and drop activities, those writing prompts. Sometimes the open education resources is just the readings or just a test bank. So you would have to actually craft those learning experiences based on what you have available to you in the open education resources. One great thing that you'll find about open education resources is that you can pull from as many as you want as it relates to the content and as it creates a logical flow for the course. So where you may be using one OER for a textbook that doesn't incorporate any interactive experiences, there may be another OER available that has those interactive experiences, and it may be customizable. But nonetheless, you want to make sure that you have ongoing evaluation as you go through each phase of the content development process. As I previously stated, South Carolina State University is a Quality Matters institution. And what's unique about the Quality Matters rubric is the concept of alignment. Now, while the Quality Matters rubric is directly related to course design, it kind of reviews a course for best practices as it relates to course design. It does have an alignment component that kind of speaks to the statements of learning objectives and course level outcomes to ensure that they all are directly related to one another and that students can readily recognize that relationship. So how do I know if my course content is aligned? When critical components of a course work together to ensure students achieve desired learning outcomes, your course is in alignment. So going back to the strategy that I told you about, that I engage faculty in when I'm doing consultations in regards to brainstorming. If you start with course level outcomes and use what I call the waterfall or trickle down effect, meaning that everything else that comes after is directly related and derived from those course level outcomes, then your content will be aligned. Another question, why is alignment so important? When assessment is aligned with instruction, both students and teachers benefit. Students are more likely to learn because instruction is focused and because they are assessed on what they are taught. Teachers are also able to focus, making the best use of their time. One of the things in an online course that I really try to drive home is that when you're teaching online, that does not mean that you need to just fill a course with content. In an online environment, I kind of operate under the premise that less is more or less is better. You want to make sure that you allow students the opportunity to see how they can relate to the content. Relating means how they can use it in work, or how they can use it in the desired career field, or how they can relate it to any other course that they're taking while enrolled in your course, after, or how the content that came before is directly related. All of those are affect alignment, okay? So making sure that when we assess students, give them a quiz or give them an activity to do, that we're making sure that we're assessing them on content that they've actually been presented with and had the opportunity to interact with. That makes a huge difference. One of the things that I've learned being an adjunct as well as in my current role is that students notice when you don't have it all together. And they don't mind calling you out on it as well. And what I mean by having it all together, have you really thought through the process of teaching and learning? Have you really sat down and put together the puzzle pieces as they relate to your content? Finally, how does alignment relate to incorporating OERs into a course? Remember when we talked about the course development process? The content development process, before you search for OERs, you need to ensure that the content you're seeking aligns with your course and program outcomes. So when we're coming up with these course level outcomes, we need to look at the program level outcomes. We need to review the university's mission or goal. We need to make sure that all of these align or are related in some manner. So now that we've selected our course level outcomes, now it's time for us to search for open education resources. So when we search for open education resources, here's some tricks and tips that you can use as you search for those OERs. You want to make sure that you provide keywords as it relates to your content when you're searching for OER databases such as Pascal. Remember that content for OERs can include textbooks, course readings, but it can also include interactive materials such as games, simulations, and one of the databases that you're going to be provided with at the end of this presentation. So make sure you have your phones ready or your computers ready to do a screenshot because I have some good references and resources for you. One of the databases is just a test bank. And it's a test bank in which you can add questions if you would like, or you could just select questions as they relate to your specific subject or content area to use in your assessments. One of the unique attributes of this particular database is that you can actually allow students to take their tests within this database by linking it to your course. So just keep that in mind, that OERs come in different shapes, forms, and sizes and fashions. It's all about tailoring it to be a learning experience that is of quality and is conducive to creating a student-centered environment within your course. When selecting open education resources, we want to make sure that we evaluate our open education resources. Hopefully this presentation will be made available to you. And there's a resource called iRubric, in which it takes you through a checklist in which you can evaluate open education resources. We want to make sure that they're trustworthy, just as when we're using the formatting features like APA or MLA. We want to make sure that they're accurate, trustworthy, and they have value, high academic value. So you want to make sure that when you're selecting all of this content, you're also looking at where the content came from. Is it research-based? Is it coming from surveys? Is it data-driven? We want to organize for use and searchability. When we're doing OERs or when we're searching for OERs, it's important that as we use those keywords, that we have some type of predefined organization for where we're going to place those, how we're going to organize the OERs, so that when we begin the process of actually selecting the content from within the OERs, it's not such a daunting task. So think about all of that, how you're going to organize it to make better use of your time, because our time is valuable. Think about all of that before engaging in the selection of content. And then we want to make sure that the material is aligned to the course level outcomes. So make sure that you're always referring back to those course level outcomes as you're searching for open education resources. Now, when we talk about the selection of content in OERs, there's something that's really, really unique about open education resources, and that's that they're customizable. We can't necessarily customize publisher-created resources. So when we customize OERs, we always talk about the 5 R's. The ability to retain, which means save it, refer to it as you would like to. You can make or develop open education resources. The second R is revise, meaning if you find an open education resource that you like and you have some literature, some research that you would like to include, you can edit it. But most importantly, you can adapt it to your specific course or content area. Remix, meaning that if you have an older version of an OER, and I just went through this with a professor, if you have an older version of an open education resource and you're looking for an updated version, well, this particular professor found an updated version, but I think it was in a different language, or it was updated in accordance with, I think, the Canadian version, which kind of spells the words differently and things of that sort. So she's in the process of what we call a remix, combining the original or older version with the revised copy, taking those updated items and kind of placing them in the original version as she does her review of the OER. Reuse, as much as possible, reuse any of the copies of OERs that you have, but just make sure that they're always current and valid. Redistribute, if you make your own OER, open education resource, or if you have your own resources that you develop for your courses, you can actually turn those into an open education resource and share them. Share them with your colleagues, share them with colleagues at other universities, share them with others that's in the same content or subject area as yourself to expand the open education resource community. After we select content, now we're ready to select the objectives, assignments, and craft those learning experiences. So why do we even set objectives? Objectives come from the course level outcomes. Remember that waterfall or trickle down effect? When we set objectives, we're thinking about a student's working memory. Our working memory has a capacity and we don't want to overload it. Think about a glass of water. If you continue to pour water into a glass, when it gets full, what happens to the water? It spills out. So that's the same thing that happens with our working knowledge. If it's full to capacity, which means we're not engaging students, we're not actually allowing them to use them and kind of logging into their cognitive memory, we're kind of overloading students. That's why when I always transition face-to-face courses to online, I always operate under the premise that less is more. We set objectives to kind of break down those course level outcomes into more manageable chunks, which we can put into our working memory. So we set objectives to provide structure and clarity of expectations for the individual. We set objectives to link the purpose of the content and course and the individual's efforts, meaning we don't want students just doing what we used to call in K-12 busy work. We want it to be meaningful. And we set objectives to form the basis from which an individual's contribution will be assessed. So I want you to notice the reoccurrence of the word individual. When we keep talking about the individual, we're talking about the student. So objectives allow us to kind of craft a student-centered learning environment. So how do we go about setting objectives? Once we have those course level outcomes, then we want to break those down into more manageable chunks by using the SMART framework. The SMART framework allows objectives to be more specific. We want to say exactly what we want students to be able to do. They allow objectives to be achievable. which means while we want them to be rigorous and challenging, we want to progress the student in their cognitive development. We also want them to have the opportunity to engage with the lesson and to actually meet or exceed the stated objectives. We want to make sure that it's relevant. And here is when we talk about making sure that it's directly related to or derived from the program level outcomes, as well as the university's goal and mission or any other governing body. And time frame. While we don't like to focus on time in education, we do only have a set amount of times to move students to a certain point. So at South Carolina State University in 15 weeks, we stated that we want students to be able to do those 5 to 7 course level outcomes. We want to make sure that we give them enough time to get there, which is why we focus on 5 to 7 and not 10. When we talk about course level outcomes, ideally we want to give students 2 to 3 weeks to kind of grasp and be able to perform as we've stated in those course level outcomes.
Barbara, we have about 8 minutes left.
Thank you so much. When we select the objectives, we use the chunking method, and this is just when we group associated content. So in an OER, you may be presented with 3 chapters that kind of cover the same material. We want to make sure that we take the material that's needed in order for students to meet the stated objective and kind of group it with the assignments that are going to go along with it. Along with that, we want to make sure that we always make sure that learning is accessible to all learners. Make sure that materials are accessible to all learners. Now, when we talk about content development, we went over the different phases of content development. So let's do another poll. Based on our discussion of content development, what's the first phase of the content development process? What is the first phase of the content development process? I'm showing we have 22 participants minus 3, which is myself, Ms. Gloria, and Ms. Mallory. So I'll wait till I get at least half. So let's say 10 responses. Right now we're at 5. What is the first phase of the content development process? Awesome. So the selection or creation of course level outcomes. Many times when we go to universities, we may be given a course syllabus. We want to make sure that we review that course syllabus to ensure that the content is current and that it's valid. And if it uses a publisher created material, go ahead and start looking for open education resources that's directly related. So if you're given a course, or if your course currently uses publisher created materials, the course design process can be tedious and timely. So as you go along throughout the semester, just start going ahead and using those keywords as they appear in your lesson, and look at those databases that you'll be presented with at the end of this presentation. Go ahead and start looking at those open education resources and selecting some that can replace some of the publisher created material that you have in your current course. Now, when we engage in the course redesign process, creating and refreshing content or full course higher education materials is a time and knowledge intensive endeavor. Now, this answer is going to vary based on, I don't want to say your level of experience or degree of experience, but how long you've been in higher education. I found that professors that are not seasoned is a good way of putting it, or 2 years or less, often find that redesigning the course is not that big deal at all, not that big of a deal at all. But as you guys have shown in your responses, the course redesign process can be knowledge and time intensive. So we want to make sure that we give ourselves enough time to kind of come up with the best quality product as possible. Many times I've seen where professors will come to me maybe even a week before the semester starts, saying that they want to transition a face-to-face course into an online course. And when I let them know about the course redesign process and whether or not they're going to be using open education resources and how we have to do research and how we have to evaluate those OERs, they often just don't come back. And that's unfortunate because we want to make sure that we are realistic about the time and effort that we have to put into redesigning courses, whether it's because we're incorporating OERs or whether it's because we want to have a better, want our students to have a better learning experience. In closing, if you would go ahead and screenshot this slide, this is a list of open education resources with some descriptions, as well as some upcoming workshops. October 19th through the 26th, and how fitting we did this presentation today. But October 19th through the 26th is Open Education Week. So it's a great week for you to get involved with some webinars and some workshops, and just kind of educate yourself or further your knowledge about open educational resources, what they are, what's available to you in your content area, and also just reach out and create a network of persons in the Open Education Network, because there is an Open Educational Resources Network, and there's a lot of people available that can help you with this. I also want to comment that our librarians are very, very instrumental in identifying open educational resources and making those available to us. So make sure that you create a partnership with your librarians. Kennesaw State University Libraries is doing an Open Access Week virtual type workshop in which they invite faculty, instructional designers to engage in workshops that's centered around open education resources.